Hi everyone. Are you ready for a chilling tale that will leave you questioning everything? Today's story takes us deep into the abandoned halls of Kings Park Psychiatric Hospital. We're talking lobotomies, mysterious diaries, and a haunting revelation. Hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and share this video with your fellow thrill seekers because you won't want to miss this. Let's dive into the chilling story of Florence Blackwell. This revelation that I got extremely lucky has always been on my mind. If I had been born just a couple of decades earlier and in the same area, who knows what may have happened to me.on, the hinges of self-awareness. I decided to break the rules for once in my life. I had to visit Kings Park and see what it was like for myself. For those of you who don't live in the New York area, Kings Park has a gate around it. It's situated in the middle of a wooded area, but it's not like there are guards and an electric fence or anything. It's private property, so you're not supposed to trespass, but I can't say that almost my entire high school didn't go anyway, but I never did. I was always too terrified of the legends, and of Cropsey in particular. I'll tell the story of Cropsey quickly because it's relevant to the history, but not really relevant to this story. Cropsey was a legend that popped up in the Long Island area, saying that one of the patients from Kings Park had escaped and was killing people in the woods around the old hospital. Only part of this was true. There was someone killing young and mostly disabled children around the hospital, but it wasn't an escaped patient. It was an old ward of the hospital that was living in tunnels and bunkers underneath the hospital. There's a really great Netflix documentary on the whole story if you're interested. Since the legend of Cropsey turned out to be based on truth, I decided this was something I just didn't want to mess with. Kings Park would just be another broken down building in the area whose memory would pop into my head at weird times. This all changed after college and my diagnosis though. I know I wasn't diagnosed with anything heavy, but I still felt a sense of responsibility, or the camaraderie of a sort, and had to see what they experienced. So one night, around 7:30 p.m., I headed over towards Kings Park with a flashlight, a backpack, and a water bottle. I figured I wasn't going to need anything else, but I did have a small hunting knife with me in my pocket. Just in case. I got to the broken down foundations of the psychiatric hospital that tortured so many innocent children, and I couldn't find the strength to do anything more than just stare up at the walls. This thing is truly massive. If you haven't seen it, it's got about 15 floors, and it just goes straight up. I decided I had to push myself into the uncomfortable, and I found a window on the ground floor that was open and climbed in. I will say in hindsight that it was stupid of me to go alone, but I had to do this for myself. It was something that I was conquering, or so I thought in my head. As I wandered aimlessly around the corridors, looking at all the graffiti on the walls, seeing the broken down bed frames with rusted metal and fingernail claw marks on what's left of the doors, I got real chills. For some reason, I felt particularly drawn to the third floor. I really can't explain what it was, but my feet just moved on their own toward this one spot on the third floor of the abandoned hospital. There really wasn't anything special about it. It was just a hallway outside of a couple of rooms near a communal bathroom. But since I was there, I looked around. I smelled the stale musk of the abandoned building and scanned the exposed brick with my eyes. As I was looking through the shattered drywall to the exposed brick beyond, I caught a glimpse of a spot that was just slightly darker than the rest of the brick and mortar. Intrigued, I moved closer and shined my flashlight right onto the dark spot. With a little poking, prodding, and removal of even more drywall, I was able to fish it free a small, string-bound diary made entirely out of loose leaf paper. There wasn't a cover, so to speak, so it was able to be folded up nice and neatly and tucked away into an empty brick space behind the wall. My curiosity was thoroughly piqued, but I wasn't dumb enough to start reading right then and there. It was dark, and I was still inside a supposedly haunted asylum. I took one last look around the place, made peace with myself and the patients of the building, and went home. Soon as I got home, and took a shower to rinse off whatever was left of Kings Park. I opened up my backpack to retrieve the diary. It seems to be the diary of a young girl who was put into the hospital back when it was in operation. I figured I'd write down the first entry here and I'll share the remainder in the next couple days. After I read that first diary entry, scribbled in a child's handwriting on a piece of loose leaf, I was spooked to say the least. I was actually holding a relic from a condemned insane asylum dating back all the way to 1918. I immediately ran to my computer. Surely there must be some kind of record of the patients put into care at Kings Park. I know it was a hospital where patients were tortured and even killed, but there should be at least some semblance of record keeping. While I could find articles labeled Kings Park patient records, I couldn't find an actual list of everyone who was under care there. Also, unfortunately, Florence Blackwell was a popular name, and Google searches of her name basically lead nowhere. I figured since my modern-day technology was striking out, the only way out was through, and I had to read more of the diary to get anywhere. I will admit that I was scared. I'm still scared to leaf through the whole thing, and I'm not reading farther than I really have to. I'm terrified for little Florence and what may have happened to her and the others in that ward, and the simultaneous screaming in the middle of the night. Something was up and I wasn't sure I really wanted to know what it was. But going back to the sense of camaraderie and duty that I felt while exploring Kings Park in the first place, I felt that same sense of duty to Florence. Her story needs to be told, and her memory needs to be honored. So I kept reading. After reading about Florence's latest entries, I was chilled to my core. I knew that lobotomies were a part of life at that time, and especially a part of life within the mental health community, but that didn't make it less jarring to read. Especially from the perspective of a 10-year-old girl. What kind of a mental health facility forces its patients to sit and watch a lobotomy being performed by a man with an ice pick? This man was literally injuring people permanently for the rest of their lives, and everyone thought it was great because it turns patients into a less violent type of patient. I decided to do a little bit of research on the history of lobotomies, and it looks like the procedure wasn't even normalized until a couple of years later, which means this entire situation was completely experimental. This man didn't have a medical license and didn't have a clue what he was doing. He was essentially just sticking a sharp object into someone's eye socket and wiggling it around until the connections between the prefrontal lobe and their brain were severed. The more that I thought about the procedure being done in front of an audience, the more I wanted to lose my lunch. Before reading any further, though, I wanted to do a little more research into who Florence was and if we know who she was at all. If I couldn't find anything online, I figured there must be some kind of written record that just hadn't made its way to the internet yet. So I went to my local library. We have a historian that works there, and I made an appointment and brought Florence's diary with me for her to evaluate. I didn't want to exactly say that I found the journal while trespassing on Kings Park grounds, so I said it was a family heirloom of sorts, and I wanted to know more about who wrote it. Immediately, she was intrigued, and after a little bit of ruffling through a big bookcase behind her desk, brought out a registry of people and families that lived in the area at the same time that Florence would have. This was a jump, because for as far as we know, Florence wasn't local. She could have been brought here from almost anywhere. We searched and searched the book for a birth record, or something to prove that Florence existed. And we actually almost missed it. There was a small entry from 1908. All it said was that William and Margaret Blackwell had given birth to a baby girl, name unknown. That must have been them. It had to be them. Sure enough, there was a World War I draft registration card for William, and they were from a couple towns over. These were too many similarities to be a coincidence. I was convinced this had to be Florence. I'm not exactly proud of what I did next, but I stalked the Blackwell family on Ancestry.com, and let me tell you, there are hundreds of people in the Long Island area with the last name Blackwell. But after a couple of sleepless nights making the best of my college-educated research skills, I found them. With butterflies in my stomach, I sent a Facebook message to what seemed to be a family member. I'm withholding names for reasons, because I don't want anyone to bother him. He was a typical old guy on Facebook, sharing memes about President Trump and clickbait ads asking for thoughts and prayers. And I really didn't think he was going to answer me, but he did. William and Margaret were his great-grandparents, and their daughter, Eleanor, was his grandmother. She was born in 1919 and apparently had a hard life. Her father was an abusive drunk who came home with shell shock after the Great War. Her mother was too submissive to say anything and took the brunt of his anger to protect her daughter. Eleanor grew up thinking she was the oldest and only in her family, but on her mother's deathbed in 1929, when Eleanor was only 10, she confessed that Eleanor wasn't the oldest. There was a daughter before her, one with a physical deformity that William had taken most of his anger out on. This physical deformity actually makes a lot of sense in the context of the next entry she had written. She used to wet the bed, and William couldn't stand to look her in the face. Eventually, he tucked her away at a mental hospital, and that's all she knew. Margaret had never seen her daughter again. While that was a lot of information to share with a stranger through Facebook, I think it was probably information that this man wanted to get off of his chest. Imagine a family secret like that just burning a hole inside your memory. I offered to let him see the diary once I was done doing some research and figuring out what happened, and he agreed, because he also wanted to know exactly what happened to Florence. And figured with me being a good bit younger, I knew my way around a computer and the internet. So I decided to keep plugging along and sharing Florence's story. After that second update, I had a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach something bad was going to happen to Florence. In my heart, I wanted to be able to hold her, to console her, and tell her everything was okay, but she lived 100 years ago. She feels so real, and her problems so relevant, that it's hard to believe this happened so long ago. With a heavy heart and a stomach full of butterflies, I continued reading the journal. I handed the diary off to Florence's family and needed a good while to wrap my head around what happened. Mary was an angel of death. She killed the patients that were going to be lobotomized because that's what she thought was the right thing to do. She left this journal for someone to find so that she can make amends with what she did. She couldn't keep it bottled up inside and couldn't just stop and leave without saving Florence, so she just left and took Florence with her. I hope to God that Florence was safe and able to live out a happy childhood, but with Mary, I just don't know.